Okay. Hello and welcome to the first webinars put on by ESHA Research pertaining to the new FDA Nutrition Facts panel and labeling laws. Today we will focus on ESHA's response to the new FDA labeling laws. We will show you what's changed in Genesis and give you tips and things to consider while navigating the newly updated version of Genesis 11.1. This webinar will be recorded and made available after the webinar. As I mentioned, this is the first of 3 webinars in a series, so let's talk a little bit about what the next 2 will encompass. The second webinar in this series will dive deeper into such topics as dietary fiber and added sugars, as well as highlight the daily value and nutrient changes and how to make unit conversions. The third webinar in the series will focus on best practices to transition from the old labels to the new labels, as well as a discussion on newly required documentation that manufacturers must maintain for certain nutrients. Lastly, in September, we will be demoing our new Genesis R&D supplement formulation and labeling software. We're very excited about this and it will be released soon. You can find more information about this on our website. We do also offer in-depth trainings. Here is a list of upcoming trainings that we offer. You can contact email training@esha.com or go on our website for more information. They are filling quickly. For those of you who don't know, ESHA has been around since before the dawn of the Nutrition Facts panel. Our solutions include not only Genesis, which we'll be showing you today, but also Supplement Facts software, as well as nutrition and diet analysis software. Our consulting services department is available for training, label creation, and regulatory advice, which as these new regulations become more clear, we'll be getting lots and lots of questions. Feel free to contact us. Genesis itself has been around since 1991 and is widely used across the industry for these types of solutions: product development, menu analysis, staying compliant with allergen and ingredient statements, nutrient analysis, and much more. Today, we'll be go over the changes again that have occurred on the labeling laws, and then my colleague Ben will lead us through a demonstration in Genesis highlighting where to find the new changes and different values needed for the old versus the new labels. Please keep in mind that this webinar will focus on the changes that have been implemented in Genesis. The following 2 webinars will go more in depth into the details and focus on answering specific questions about dietary fiber, added sugar, and additional nutrients. We will be showing you a little bit about some reports that might be helpful in Genesis. And as a reminder, it's a good time to start working with your suppliers, getting updated spec sheets, working with them to get the documentation that we'll all be needing moving forward. So the timeline to comply. For those companies that make 10 million in annual food sales or more, they will have 2 years to comply, and for those making $10 million or less than $10 million, you'll have 3 years to comply. So the last date to comply will be July 26, 2019. Keep in mind that if your product has been produced before that date, you can still have your product on the shelf with the old label. You just cannot produce anything after that date and have the old label on it. Keep in mind that Genesis will indeed keep both labels. The 1990 NLEA and the 2016 NLEA through the compliance date. As you can see here, there have been many changes, including formatting changes and mandatory nutrients, changes in percent DV, as well as unit changes. Looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. If you can just bear with me for a second. Perfect. Okay. So as I was saying, we will continue to have both labels in Genesis, and Ben will show you today how to operate for both the old and new label and what information will be needed, as there are different fields required for each label. So let's talk a little bit as a reminder of all the nutrient changes, and this we will dive into more in our next webinar, but some things to keep in mind and why these changes have been implemented. We've had added sugars added as a mandatory nutrient vitamin D and potassium have also been added as mandatory nutrients. The reason for this is it's been determined that the American population is getting too much added sugar and not enough vitamin D and potassium. So the FDA wants to bring those to the consumer's eyes to be aware, and that's why they're now on the label. Vitamin A and vitamin C, which used to be mandatory, were once thought of as nutrients that were common to have deficiencies in. That is no longer the case, and so they have been moved to voluntary. Some new voluntary nutrients that you can put on your label, which wasn't available before, is fluoride and choline. The FDA has also removed a couple, which would be other carbohydrates and calories from fat. The reasons for this is it's been determined that it is the type of fat that's more important rather than the amount of fat. And other carbohydrates is not a public health concern in the FDA's eyes. With that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Ben, who will expertly lead us through all of the new changes in Genesis.
All right, thank you, Maya. So we are now looking at the Genesis application, the newest version, which is version 11.1. This demonstration will assume you have a moderate knowledge of Genesis or you've used it previously. If you're not sure which version of Genesis you're currently running, you can simply go to the Home tab, as you see here, and then click on the About button, and it will show you what version. If your interface looks a little bit different than this, it would probably be under the Help menu, drop-down menu, then either Information or About. The first thing we'll take a look at is kind of the default preferences for the application for the new labeling regulations. So if we go to the Home tab and Preferences, we now have a new regulation area, and you can select between the two different labeling regulations, the US 1990 and US 2016 labeling. This will change the nutrients that show percent daily values when you're creating ingredients, and it will also change the default when you create new labels or new recipes, what label is by default shown for that recipe. You can certainly change back and forth between the two inside of a recipe itself, but this would just change the default for what you see. Any existing recipes that you have in your application or in your database before you update to version 11.1 will still show the 1990 label, and we'll go into a little more detail in a couple minutes on how to go in and change those preferences. So right now I'm going to leave it just as the 2016 label. We'll hit OK. Another thing that was added that's a kind of global setting is going to be your nutrients to view. We've added in a couple of new nutrient sets for your nutrients to view. Previously we had the US label mandatory and US label all, which still exist. Mandatory would be the mandatory label nutrients for the 1990 label, and all would be the mandatory and voluntary nutrients combined. We now have the US label 2016 mandatory and all, which is just going to be the nutrients that were changed for the new labeling regulations this year for the mandatory nutrients and the mandatory plus voluntary nutrients. And we'll go ahead and take a look in, I'm going to open up an ingredient now. We'll take a look at some of the new fields and where you need to add in information for it to display properly on both labels. So I'm going to open up just a USDA apple here, and that's not the correct item. We'll go ahead and open up this item here. And we're going to be showing, I've got a set of nutrients that's going to show both the 1990 and the 2016 nutrients. So right now we're taking a look at my kind of customized set of nutrients. For the 1990 label and for any existing recipes and existing labels, we had the old total dietary fiber field, which was what would show for your dietary fiber on your labels. For the new label, we've added a few 2016 fields here. So the dietary fiber 2016 is the field that you'll want to fill out for your new labels, just because the changes in dietary fiber have been made to remove non-beneficial dietary fiber. And same with soluble and insoluble fiber. Total insoluble and insoluble will be the 1990 label, and then the soluble fiber 2016 and insoluble will be the voluntary nutrients if you're showing a 2016 label. And then the other fibers will be the non-beneficial. And we'll go into a lot more detail on specifically fibers and added sugars in our next webinar. For added sugars, it's another standalone nutrient in the ingredient that you can add. It's not calculated in any way from the sugars that are added into an item. Many of the ESHA ingredients that we have in the database have been filled already with added sugars and the new 2016 fibers values. Anything something like what we're looking at here, an apple, doesn't have any added sugars because all the sugar is natural inside of it, so it shows as a 0 value. And then anything that's considered a complete added sugar, something like granulated sugar, brown sugar, honey, would all be considered a fully added sugar. So your total sugar and added sugars would equal that for ingredients provided by in the ESHA database. For user-created items, you will need to fill those out yourself. So if you add in an ingredient that is your own customized sugar, you'll have to fill out both the total sugars and added sugars fields. We'll take a look at vitamin D as well. Vitamin D's measurement has changed for the new label. In the old label, you had the IU value of vitamin D. For the new label, you have microgram. Again, there's no connection between the two fields as we look at them in the ingredients. So if you created your own user-defined ingredients, you entered your vitamin D as an IU value, you'll want to go back into your ingredient, do the conversion from IU to microgram, and fill out that value as needed. And same with all of the other vitamins. Vitamin A, as we see here, is measured in IU. That would be for the 1990 label. For a 2016 label, if you wanted to add vitamin A on your label, now that it's a voluntary nutrient, you could go into the vitamin A microgram value and add that in. Actually, I believe it's RAE, it's vitamin A. And then we'll still see the calories from fat field in the application. It's still automatically calculated based on the amount of fat in your ingredient, but for new labels, it just simply won't be shown. And we'll go ahead and close this ingredient now, and we'll open up an existing recipe that I've got. We'll take a look at kind of how to change your label, some comparisons between the new label and the old label. So we'll open up our fruit salad, sample fruit salad. And we'll open up the label display here to take a look at that. There we go. So we got the new label for that item now. I'm also going to go ahead and open up a advanced label that I created earlier. That's a label for this exact same recipe, that sample fruit salad, but it's set for the 1990 regulation. So we see side-by-side comparison. A lot of changes have happened. Calories has been increased in size by quite a bit. Calories from fat is now gone. There's a line under Nutrition Facts. The footer has changed quite drastically. There's no longer this 2,000 and 2,500 calories footnote here. And then you've got the vitamin D. Oops, I had a bunch of voluntary nutrients. I'm going to go ahead and just change that really fast so we don't have to look at that. I meant to save that. I apologize. So now we've got just the mandatory nutrients on both of these. So we've got vitamin A, or vitamin D, calcium, iron, potassium at the bottom here, vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron at the bottom of our old label. I'll go ahead and close out this old label now and focus in on just the sample fruit salad recipe that we currently have open. So if you open up your existing recipes and you've got your old label viewed instead of the new label as I'm showing now, to change that, what you'll want to do is go to the recipe ribbon here and click on Edit Label. And then under the General tab, you will have a category option. And under category, you will have the Nutrition Facts 1990, Supplement Facts 1990, and then the Nutrition Facts and Supplement Facts. The ones without a date, so just simply Nutrition Facts, is going to be the 2016 regulations, so the new label. If we go ahead and just click over to the 1990 label, it'll simply change us over to the default nutrients and the default outline of that old label. I can go right back into Edit Label and change us to Nutrition Facts, the new regulations. Let me expand it back up so you can see it a little bit better. And it's just very easy to change back and forth. As I mentioned earlier, for your creating new recipes, the one that will be selected here is what you select in your preferences. So if you go to Home and then Preferences, under that default, you'll be able to select either the 1990 regulations or the 2016 regulations. Just like the old label, let me cancel this back out. Just like the old label, the new label will follow all of the formatting regulations needed, so spacing, font size, all that stuff is handled by Genesis, so you don't have to worry about that little minutia. So we can take a look quickly at now. We can look at a couple of different vitamin changes, as I pointed out a little bit earlier. If we take a look at the 1990 label, as we mentioned, we've got the vitamin A and vitamin C values. If we take a look at changing the label now back to the 2016 label, under voluntary nutrients, we now have vitamin A, which is the RAE value, and vitamin C. So if you still would like to show those nutrients that were mandatory, which have been moved over to voluntary, you can still do that just by simply going to the voluntary nutrients area and selecting it. Another thing that has changed for the new label, let me expand that back up again, wish it would hold that, is the vitamins and minerals will now show their actual values. So vitamin D will show the microgram value, and as you see here, it's not the default, but you can also show the IU value for your vitamin D as well. Calcium, iron, potassium are all going to be showing their microgram value. For the mandatory nutrients, those are required. For voluntary nutrients, let's go ahead and add a couple of those on. Let's add our vitamin C, and let's go B2. If we add those onto our label, we see that they are now riboflavin as vitamin B2 and the vitamin C are showing their values. If we'd like to remove those, you can. You can go to Edit Label, Nutrient Options. If we look at vitamin B2, it just shows Show Amount. If we uncheck that box, it'll then remove the microgram value. So that's certainly an option that you can leave or remove. All right, and we've taken a look at the label a little bit. Let's take a look at maybe a couple of reports that can help us out with our formulation and confirming that we have our changed values. So the report that I would suggest looking at the most would be the spreadsheet report. We open up our spreadsheet report. It'll give us a detailed breakdown of all of the ingredients and all of the nutrients. So we can take a look and see, if I can scroll over here, our added sugars value. And look at all of the values for all of the nutrients. This will give you a great breakdown if you're trying to figure out maybe why your added sugars value isn't adding up properly or adding up to the value you would assume it would be. You can take a look and see, right now I have 0 added sugars in my recipe, but my pears and my whipped topping are both double dash value, which would be an undefined value. So there's a pretty good chance that my sample fruit salad does have added sugars because my whipped topping probably has some of the sugars in it is probably added. But it just has an undefined value. So if you run into that with any ingredients, if they're ingredients that you've added yourself, you can go right back into your recipe, open that item, right-click and hit Open Item, and then give the value for added sugars or vitamin D that you seem to be missing. Same with vitamin D. Again, we have vitamin D microgram and IU, so you got to make sure that both of those are filled out. Any ESHA items will have both fields filled out, but if you have any that you've created yourself, you'll want to go ahead and make sure you have that conversion of IU to microgram. It certainly is a great resource here, the spreadsheet report, just to confirm all of your values have been added in. Make sure you don't have any blank values to make sure your formulations are as accurate as possible. And then one more thing that looks like will be quite a bit more common with the new regulations is going to be the dual column labels. So I'll go ahead and create one of those really quick. It's on the fly here. I'll go ahead and minimize this recipe here. So we'll want to go to File, New, Advanced Label to create a dual column label. I'll just call it fruit salad. Oops, fruit salad dual column. And then what you'll want to do is simply add that recipe in twice. So I've got my sample fruit salad, select it, and then select that sample fruit salad item again. This will be used a lot for items or for packaging that has a serving size, but then you also have to show the nutritional values of the full package of the item. So if it's under 250% of the rack, you'll have to show both for most items. So you can simply go into the edit the item. The first item will show up as the serving size that you've created it under. And then we can choose the second item, hit edit, and you can override the serving size. So if your package is going to contain 200 grams of that item instead of 120, hit OK. And then once we hit OK here, let me change this really quick. You make sure we've got the different, we've got to change ourselves to a dual column here. And we'll hit OK, and then it'll create us a dual column label of this recipe. Expand that out a little bit. As I mentioned, that'll be very important for products that our ingredient statement got in the way a little bit here. They'll be very important for items that that need to show both two different values. Oh. It just doesn't want to show right when I expand it. I apologize for that. But for packages that you'll need to show both the serving size and then the full package size. And I actually just realized I skipped over one thing, so we've taken a look at dual columns. Let's go ahead and go back to our recipe that we were looking at. We do have all of the other label types, so I showed just the vertical label. I certainly didn't even get into tabular or linear labels. So if we go into the edit label area again in our recipe, sorry to jump around a little bit here, we'll still have the same options for under the label. You'll have the adult label, the child label for infants through 12 months, child 1 to 3, and then U.S. pregnant and lactating, which is a brand new format for labels for the new 2016 label. And then the style, you have the option for vertical, horizontal, and linear. So we click on horizontal here. Will create us that new label. Expand that out a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. I'll show that the new formatted label in a horizontal fashion instead of that that vertical fashion. And same with the linear. Linear is very similar to the old label, but the calories is just quite a bit bigger, and then obviously the mandatory nutrients change, of course, as well. And then same with creating a supplement fact panel. Just like in the old version, if you click on supplement facts, it'll create a supplement fact panel for us, and then you can change the nutrients as desired. Make sure I didn't skip over anything else as I was running through things here. Just like the older style, you can do a simplified format as well. So we change it to the new 2016 label, simplified format, and that'll take all of the insignificant nutrients and put them in that not significant source of statement at the bottom, as we see here. We'll go ahead and take a look now, go back to our slideshow. Those at the bottom here. Do a quick little recap here.
Thank you, Ben. That was great. There's a lot of new gizmos and gadgets in Genesis, and we're very excited about it. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Do you have the latest version of Genesis? So that would be 11.1. We want to make sure that you definitely have that update so that you can have the option of going with the new label. Are you entering your own ingredients, and are there other things that you need to consider with the ingredients that you're entering, such as these other nutrients that aren't required on the old label? In order to get that information, you can work with your suppliers, lab tests, and we have populated our database as well when available. Are you using the old or new label, and what considerations do you need to do for that? And do you have the preferences set correctly in Genesis for the regulations that you'd like to move to? Additionally, so kind of continuing on, is there additional information that you need for the nutrients on the new label? Is there missing data points in your ingredients? And you can use the spreadsheet report to look for those dashed lines. That will show you where you need to kind of get some more information on items like vitamin D, potassium, added sugar, etc. Remember that the nutrients to view, you can toggle between the 2016 and the prior nutrients to view. You can make your own nutrients to view. So remember to modify that as needed, and remember that you have a lot of options with what you'd like to view. And then lastly, which we didn't get too much into talking about today, what we will in the next few webinars, is there have been some rack changes to a couple groupings of foods. So to keep in mind, if you are using the new label, has the rack change, and does that affect your serving size? I know what you're thinking. What about fiber and added sugar? Don't worry, we will dive in deep with specific examples, questions, examples of spec sheets and how to input your own ingredients, and how to kind of work with your suppliers to talk through added sugar and fiber. So please attend our next webinar for information on those two items. Now I think we're going to dive into some questions, and a couple of things I want to mention that to keep in mind. We do have a lot of resources on our website. We also have a LinkedIn community that you are more than welcome to join, and you can ask questions in the public forum. We have blogs and newsletters that come out all the time. We have a new ebook coming out next week that will be on all the new regulations. And so please go ahead and feel free to contact us and use the resources that are available. So to dive into the questions, one of the questions we've been getting a lot on is font size, and we got so many of these questions before, we wanted to go ahead and show you that Genesis has, this is a blog on our website. Genesis has taken into account all of the font sizing, the formatting changes, the line spacing. We've taken all of that minutia as been mentioned and inputted it into Genesis. So that is completely taken care of for you. So that is a really big benefit of having the updated version, is that we've gone through and made all those changes for you. So let's see. We have a little bit of time for questions, so let's go ahead and dive in. Let's see, what is the deadline for compliance again? So if you are a business that has 10 million annual food sales or more, you will have until July 26, 2018. And if you make less than 10 million annual food sales, you will have July 26, 2019. So 2 years for larger companies and 3 years for smaller companies. Let's see here. Will you provide the dietary fiber data for all your ingredients? Ditto for added sugars, folate, and vitamin E. Well, the USDA database has already been reporting vitamin D, vitamin E, and potassium for many foods, so those have already been in our ingredients whenever possible. We didn't have to add those in. We have gone in and added sugars and updated the dietary fiber fields for as many foods as possible, and we'll continue to do that with ongoing updates as well. But do remember that if you have entered your own ingredients, you will need to go in and make those changes yourself. Let's see, I've got another question that says, my old formulas come up with the old food label. How do I get them to show the new food label? Well, the reason that we did this, we made the decision to keep all the old recipes in the same manner that you would have them, so that if it's a recipe that was using the old label, it will continue to stay that way. Because there's so much additional information needed on the new label, we didn't feel it would be appropriate to make that change for you, because it really needs to be done manually. So if you do want to go ahead and transfer that over to your new label, you'll need to go into your edit label here and change it from the Nutrition Facts Panel 1990 NLEA to the Nutrition Facts, and that will bring you your new the new label. Let's see here. Why am I not seeing the new dietary fiber fields when I enter an ingredient or show reports? Ben, can you show us a little bit about that, perhaps?
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and I'll close off my recipe that we had open previously. Save that. We'll open up an existing recipe again. Let's open up that apple again. So by default, the nutrients that you see when you first open up an ingredient are going to be the nutrients that you have in your nutrients to view set. So the new nutrients at this point, and I believe we are looking to change it, but the nutrients for the default set of the Genesis SQL that we see here do not have the new dietary fiber in them. So if you go into nutrients to view and select either the US label 2016 mandatory or all, we'll go ahead and change that off, and we should now see all of the new nutrient sets as are available to be shown on a label. We don't see all of the 2016 fibers, we just see the 3 that are available on the label. So if you wanted the other ones, what you can do is either go into nutrients to view and modify, and you can create a set that includes all of the new nutrients or the exact set of nutrients that you would like to view. Or if you just want to see every nutrient in the entire database, you have the checkbox down here that says Show All Nutrients. If you check that, you'll see every single, all 180 nutrients that we show in the entire database. So it gives you everything, maybe more than you need to see, but it'll certainly show you all of the different nutrients that are available.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. And these are some great questions, as everyone is having similar questions, so we appreciate all the questions that are coming in. I've got another one that I think is pretty interesting. Do company websites need to be updated to match both the content and display of the nutrition panels on the packages with this regulation? I have not seen anything in the regulations talking about websites. In general, the FDA is more concerned with anything that's claim-oriented on your website, so you can definitely get the attention of the FDA if you're making claims on your website. However, the reality is there is quite a bit of missing and varying information on websites for nutrition facts panels, and I haven't seen anything specifically in the regulations stating that nutrition facts panels on websites need to be updated by this date. Of course, it would be beneficial to your company to keep all of that information up to date, and definitely help keep your consumers happy, I would think. Let's see, we got time for a couple more. Do we have to update all user-added ingredients manually? Yes, you will have to do this. That is the short answer of that. And some things to keep in mind that you'll need to change would be added sugar. You'd need to change or at least make that transfer, decide which dietary fiber field you need to enter information into. You need to make sure that you're going to have vitamin D and potassium information, and also make sure that when there has been unit changes in nutrient unit changes, you're going to need to make those conversions manually, and we will go through how to do that, and we also have information in our resources about how to make those conversions. Let's see, I've got another question coming in. It says, we send in most of our nutritionals for lab analysis and enter the results as an ingredient in Genesis and use Genesis recipes to vary serving sizes. How do I report and calculate added sugars in this scenario? Well, in this scenario, because there's no lab test to decipher naturally occurring sugars versus added sugars, you're going to need to look at each of your recipes and your ingredients and identify anything that would be considered added sugars. So this would be things such as simple sugar, white sugar, brown sugar, syrups, agave, honey, and in some cases fruit concentrates when they're in excess of what would be found in a juice of 100%, if it was 100% juice. If the fruit juice concentrate is in excess of that, then that can also be considered an added sugar. So it's about looking at your ingredients, identifying whether or not it's naturally occurring versus added, and then putting those into the correct fields. And added sugars has actually been a field in our nutrient database for about a year, I believe. Another question, when I update an ingredient, do those change? Show up in all recipes. Okay. Show up in all the recipes the ingredient is used. Oh, of course, yes. When you update one ingredient, so I'm going to repeat the question. The question was, if you make a change to an ingredient, will that sort of pull forward through all of your recipes? And the answer is yes. So anytime you save an ingredient, wherever that's used in Genesis, that ingredient will remain whatever you have updated. So that's the nice thing, and it's the best practice to kind of start from the ingredient side and make your changes from that end, and then it'll be easier to kind of make that switch for all of your recipes if you start to update your individual ingredients. And we've got a question about can we see another dual label example? Yeah, and I'll have Ben show that to you. And like as he mentioned, these would be things like perhaps a bottle of soda. So you've got a serving size which is for the 12-ounce serving, and then you've also got a serving size for the 20-ounce. And Ben, I'll let you take the mic and talk a little bit more about dual column.
All right, I'll go ahead and go back through one more time. So this is a pretty quick example of just kind of creating a new dual column label. So for that, you'll have to make sure you already have your recipes created, either a single recipe that you're going to show in different serving sizes or multiple, kind of like what used to be the aggregate label in the 1990 label, where you're showing multiple different products on the same package or on the same label, or something like macaroni and cheese, where you have it as boxed and as prepared. So all of those fall under the umbrella of dual column. Now, there's no difference between a dual declaration, as it used to be called, and an aggregate label, as it used to be called. They've both been converted into the single dual column label type. So we'll go to New, Advanced Label. I'll say Test Advanced Label. Under the regulation, you'll want to make sure you have U.S. Nutrition Facts for the category is what you'll want to select. If you choose the 1990 option, you'll have the option for the dual declaration and aggregate, as they used to be able to do for the new Nutrition Facts. If you select that as your category, you'll then have the option to do a dual column label. And then we'll just want to add in the recipes that you'd like to do. So if you've got as Maya was mentioning, a soda that you are doing the single serving for, which is 8 ounces, and then the full bottle of 20 ounces, we'll select that recipe. I'm just going to do the fruit salad as an example, though. And then you can add in the exact same recipe a second time. By default, when you add in these items, the serving size will be 1 serving of the recipe that you've created. So if your recipe is set as 50 grams as your serving, that's what it will show up as on this label. But you can change that by clicking on the recipe you'd like to change. Click Edit. And then there's a checkbox for Override Recipe Serving Size. My default serving size is 121 grams. I'll change that to 200. And we click OK. And then we'll click OK again, and it will actually generate our label, and we can save it and adjust it as needed. If you ever need to adjust anything, the different recipes that are in it, or if you want to adjust the serving size, you can go into the Label tab here, and then Edit Label, and it gives you that exact same window again. So we can go into the different recipes and either edit the serving size or change the serving size and servings per container on the label itself.
Great, thanks, Ben. And our last question is kind of in the same line of that. It is, how will I know if I have to use a dual column label? This is slightly discretionary. The FDA has given basically anything that is commonly consumed in one sitting or a few sittings. So the examples that have been given are bottles of soda, as I mentioned, perhaps a bag of chips, ice cream cartons. So if it's something that you can see consumers consuming the entire package more commonly than actually the serving size, that would be a good reason to use it. Also, as Ben mentioned, as packaged, as prepared, so for things like pancake mixes or a soup mix, something like that. So there are a couple different times, and we're hopefully still waiting for some more clarification and some more examples from the FDA on that. And we're getting just about to the end of our webinar. And one thing we're going to just show one more example of is, how can I find all recipes that contain a specific ingredient in Genesis? So that's a great question, and I'll let Ben take over for that.
All right, so we'll go ahead and show that. If you want to show all of the recipes that contain a specific ingredient, you'll want to go to Home, Open, Recipe, and then click on the More button. And then if you search for the ingredient that you're looking for, so if I'm looking for banana, you'll then click on the box that says search within items for matches to the above criteria. If you click on this, it will no longer be actually searching for recipe names, but ingredient names within those recipes. I probably won't get much of anything. I got my sample fruit salad as a result because it contains a banana. But if you have a single ingredient that contains a number of different items, something like a salt, you can do the same thing. And I may not have much of anything that actually contains that, but we get a couple of results here.
Wonderful, thank you. And that would be something useful to keep in mind if you need to update a certain ingredient and you want to figure out where is this being used in all of my recipes. So again, we want to thank you for attending and remind you that this is the first of 3 in a series. We look forward to continuing to provide great service to you, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you.